What's up, Call of Duty fans? Welcome back to Checkmate Gaming. I hold shift, and we're dealing with power rankings today. Starting at the very bottom. Hard to move anybody from here because it's a Seattle Surge. All they won this last weekend was domination. They're 11th in the hard point now. Still dead last in Search and Destroy by an absolute country mile. They are doing okay in Dom, though. That's the only bit of good news for these guys, that if they can improve in Hardpoint and Search and Destroy, maybe there's a chance that they get past the first round of the losers round, which is where you figured they start off in playoffs. Yes, they do play in the Toronto home series coming up, but they've got Chicago first, and they've got Toronto and OGLA in that pool. So, yeah, maybe you can win one of those games in a loser's bracket. You're not going to beat Chicago, but you might be able to beat either Toronto or OGLA if you come out hot. But the problem is, when it comes down to them winning a respawn, specifically a hardpoint, and winning a Search and Destroy, this last weekend was not a good instance to showcase that that's going to happen. They went for 2 losses in Search, a 2-6 and a 1-6 loss, and their closest hardpoint was a 223 to 250. They got a 100-point clubbed. 77-250 by the London Royal Ravens. Things not good in Seattle. 11th position, a little bit of a slip here for the Los Angeles Guerrillas. This is still the worst respawn team in the game after this last weekend where they lost to both the New York Subliners and the Paris Legion. They still are striking out when it comes to domination, and they're not just losing domination. They're getting smoked in domination. The good news for this week was that they did look marginally better versus Paris in the hardpoint. But then the opposite bad news was they got kind of blown out in both Search and Destroys they played, especially the one versus Paris with the loss 6-0. This was the only thing that LA had going for them. They were the 3rd best Search and Destroy team going into this weekend. They now slipped to the 4th best. And, well, when you don't win a single one of those searches, you're wondering if your playoff hopes are going to be anything at this point in time. You've got to find a way to be better at Search. Their domination, I don't know, just chalk it up. In my 10th position, another slip here for the Minnesota Rocker, who did not play this last weekend, but last we had a chance to watch them. They didn't look terribly improved. They did go 5 versus the London Royal Ravens, and yeah, sure, some of those maps were relatively close versus the New York Subliners, but overall, this squad is really suffering a lot, especially in the Search and Destroy. They've won 2 search maps in the past, 12 attempts. Things not looking good for Minnesota. They do go into the Toronto weekend where they have to play up against Atlanta first, and then they take the loser of Dallas and Florida. So Minnesota's going to go 0-2 most likely, and they will still, I believe, secure themselves a middle 4 position in playoffs, but I don't know. I'm not feeling good about this Minnesota team lately. I do have a little bit of a bump here for the Paris Legion, and the only reason that I have them up here is simply because I do see if this team continues to do as well as they did in the Search and Destroy and still go 50-50 on their hard points, I think they can beat teams that are ranked below them and maybe a couple that are ranked above them. In particular, though, yes, they did beat the New York Subliners 3-0. I really don't think that that's going to happen again. Their Search and Destroy was much improved, yes, and they were clutching up round 11s, which is great. Beyond that, they were actually able to extend maps to round 10, round 11, and then convert the round 11. That's good news for Paris. The bad news is you're still looking really vulnerable at a number of moments on your hard point, and your domination is kind of finding the same thing. And the reason why? It really does simply feel like, do your SMGs show up for that map? If their SMGs play well, these guys can beat squads. But if they don't play well, they lose to almost everybody. So a lot of concern here, but I think overall with Paris getting to the grand finals, getting themselves 100 points, they'll likely be sitting here in the somewhere between the 9th, 10th, and 8th spot, somewhere in the mix there. Speaking of the 8th spot, I've got Optic Gaming LA still maintaining their spot. Yeah, their weekend was a little bit all over the place. They did bring in both Hollow and Draza, who I thought looked relatively good throughout the weekend. Definitely as far as double subs that are coming in, they played better than most others that we've seen so far this season. And yeah, they played up against what seemed to be a pretty vulnerable Florida Mutineers squad, but while they were playing in that series, actually both of those series, they looked relatively calm throughout everything. They only had a couple of really bad losses. You hope that those things will be fixed up before they go into next weekend, where they have to play up against the Toronto Ultra in a very pivotal matchup that could determine whether or not Optic Gaming can work their way out of the bottom 4 in the playoffs. In my 7th position, I've got the London Royal Ravens still standing here, and yes, they make it past the Florida Mutineers in Game 5, and they do get to the playoffs, but beyond a pretty vulnerable Florida team, they didn't really play anybody all that good this weekend. Yes, they looked better overall through and through and the full 5-man roster than they had previously. Like I mentioned, their schedule was not necessarily the hardest thing in the world. So still a 7th position here for the London Royal Ravens. They do secure themselves a middle 4 position in the playoffs, and they do have the upcoming week off before they get to the playoffs at the end of August. Going into my top 6, not a lot of movement here for the Toronto Ultra. I still think that expectations are a little bit mismatched right now, mostly because they are going into a very difficult weekend at their own home series, but they're going into a group that they should and well need to be able to navigate to get to the playoff. The question from there goes down to, can Toronto beat a major team? Yes, they beat the Atlanta FaZe last time around, 3-2, map 5, and they were able to take them to another map 5 previous to that, but I'm mostly curious how this squad's going to face up against teams like Florida, Dallas, and Chicago, let alone the fact that they're going to have, again, that must-win match versus Optic Gaming LA to get through. This Toronto Ultra team is pretty average across the board when it comes to each individual mode ranking in the CDL, so we'll see if they can improve those totals like they have in the last 2 outings that they faced. Going into my 5th position, still a solid position for the New York Subliners to sit in my mind. Still in 5th, no movement. Yes, they had a little bit of a weird weekend where they only got a 3-0 versus LAG and then got 0-3 losses versus both Dallas and Paris. But really, outside of the dominations, mostly everything was close, especially in the hard point. This is interesting because when we were talking about New York after they won the previous weekend, we were sitting there saying, are these guys going to be able to consistently play up against the top teams in the league? And beyond that, can they convincingly take down teams below them? This weekend has showcased that no, not yet. They still have some work to do. They're looking solid. They're looking much improved. But when it comes down to beating the top 4 squads above them and continuously beating the teams rated below them, there still are some question marks. So improvements need to be made for New York. This was their final outing for the regular season, so we'll be waiting to watch to see what they could do in playoffs, where they should lock in a number 5 position going into that playoff. And then into my top 4, the Atlanta FaZe I still have as my 4th position, did not play this last weekend, and they're going to have to finish off this regular season with a bang, as they do have a pretty easy matchup versus the Minnesota Rocker coming up first, but they're going to have to find a way to get into playoffs by going through either Florida or Dallas, if not potentially both, depending on the outcomes of what you figure will be the qualifying match in round number 2. Atlanta did showcase that they're getting a little bit better, a little bit stronger. Abizi's showcasing that he very well could be MVP form coming into the later parts of this season, but we still have questions. We've thrown life rafts out to the Atlanta FaZe. This is the time for them to convincingly show us what they're going to be bringing into playoffs. They still rank 2nd in both respawns and now 1st in the search and destroy, a good place for them to be absolutely when it comes to the overall rankings. 2 spots moved down for the Florida Mutineers in my 3rd position. Obviously, this last weekend kind of gave us the different look than what we saw in the month of June. They still played well, and I think with some more time, this meta and this squad will be just fine. Just dandy, just peachy. They'll be okay. But the problem is, there are other teams that are now around them that are using this meta to a higher level than what we saw from Florida. So they're going to have to find a way to not just be good individually, but they're going to have to find a way to get better overall as a team, I feel like, because Dallas, Chicago, and Atlanta have all showcased improvements, and to be honest, the meta seems to be doing extreme wonders for the Dallas Empire after we last saw them play. So, for me, for Florida, I'm looking at the respawn. You got to continue to be good. They did not have the worst weekend overall. They went 50-50 in just about everything when it comes to win-losses, but how are you going to get to a point where you can find wins against the teams that are currently rated above you? Not a big question to ask because they've done it before, but still one to consider as they go to the Toronto home series. In my 2nd position, a bump for the Chicago Huntsmen. They looked great the weekend before. I've got high hopes for them to get out of their group stage relatively easily, making themselves into a playoffs where they can contend for another home series championship. Is it possible? Absolutely. Is it probable? I would say yes, absolutely, that Chicago could win this event. I would not be surprised to see a Chicago-Dallas finals, and if that were to occur, I think we'll get a pretty interesting look to see how the ARs truly do line up for both of those squads as we finish off. Chicago is now the best hardpoint team currently in the league. They sit 3rd in search and 3rd in dom, but again, between 1, 2, and 3, all of those categories are extremely close based on win percentage and point average differential. So again, anything can happen. Definitely showcasing that this is a major squad. And then number 1, I've got the Dallas Empire. Kind of hard to deny it, I think. There might be some conversation, Chicago, Dallas, but the fact that Dallas just absolutely blew this event wide open, only losing a single map, of which was a search and destroy where they probably would have wanted back. They had a couple of pretty key mistakes. Everything else was essentially a blowout. The closest hardpoint game they had was 250 to 219, and then their closest dom game was a 176 to 152. Nobody touched them in domination this weekend. So for me, Dallas currently best team in the game. We'll see how things unfold, as again, they're going into a very trying group in Toronto where they've got Florida again first, and then they'll likely have to play up against Atlanta at some point in time before or if they make the playoff to try to finish off the regular season. Coming up the last part of this weekend, we'll be jumping in to take a look at what all the win conditions and scenarios are for playoffs for these guys as they get into the Toronto home series. Beyond that, we'll also be doing another breakdown and analytical piece, so make sure you subscribe right here at Checkmate Gaming. Get the notifications turned on, and hopefully we'll see you guys back for the next one. Until then, though, hope you keep holding it down. So long.